Hello. I want to discuss a little bit the life of the heavyweight boxer Muhammad Ali, a man who really needs no introduction, one of the most famous people of the 20th century without question. Of course, Ali passed away last year, June last year, so it's about a year and a half now since he passed away. I've just ordered this on eBay. It's a Time magazine copy. A special, of course, on Ali's obituary. They do that occasionally with particularly prominent people. I've also got one, the version for Nelson Mandela and Robin Williams, and they've done it with others. Not everyone, but particularly prominent people. Of Ali's fame, there is no question. He is by far the most famous boxer of all time. Probably Mike Tyson would be the runner up, but Ali really does transcend the sport. There's no question about that. And as a cultural figure, again, he is incredibly famous. I mean, the response to his death was an example of that. You know, the fact his funeral was attended by former presidents and the sort of response that it got, the sort of coverage, which was to be expected, was testament to that. Now, what I want to do is discuss a bit what I really feel is a personality cult around this man, and I something that makes me very uncomfortable because a lot of it is based on plain falsehoods. Um, Now, the reason I use the term personality cult is because that is unquestionably the case. I can't think of any other celebrity off the top of my head that gets as much blind adulation as Muhammad Ali. Maybe you get some other figures, John Lennon, a few others, where you get a sort of blind worship from hardcore fans. But I think Ali maybe transcends anyone. Um, the only other example would be in totalitarian regimes where you have dictators imposing a personality cult. But that's obviously not the case with Ali. He wasn't a dictator. He was never a head of state or anything like that. But as a public figure, there is definitely this mentality around his legacy. And it basically goes like this. Obviously, there's dozens, hundreds, probably thousands of videos on YouTube to Muhammad Ali. I find YouTube is quite a good barometer of gauging the thinking of this, generation. Well, not everyone that uses YouTube is millennials. The point I'm making is it's a good way to gauge public opinion when you see the traction of comments, the traction of thumbs up, and the way that videos. I've made this point before. You get a lot of sensationalist videos, and it's usually along the lines of person A owns person B, person A destroys person B, and both left and right are guilty of it. And that's very much the case with Muhammad Ali. Pretty much every video about Muhammad Ali that is not, footage of a fight is Ali destroying white person's argument, Ali um, making this person look like an Uncle Tom, Ali doing this, Ali doing that, Ali being Superman. What makes me most uncomfortable about any personality cult is the utter inability for people to think for themselves. So they take the sanitized version of someone's history, or they take the popular version, they endorse it, and anyone who has a different point of view or points out some facts is immediately denounced as a dangerous counter-revolutionary. It makes me very uncomfortable because there's no way to stand up to that sort of mentality. Now I understand that in every debates are there isn't an equilibrium. There are going to be some situations where there is a more popular viewpoint. I get that, but with Muhammad Ali, there is no these people, and what I'm talking about is hardcore Ali supporters, don't want to see anything other than blind praise. So anything that detracts from that is in their tiny minds dangerous. And I'm aware that I won't make myself popular with this, but these things have to be said. I'm not the only one to say them, incidentally. What people conveniently forget is that for much of his life, Ali was actually a very polarizing figure. This rehabilitation of his image is something I would argue began probably, I would say the 1996 Atlanta Olympics was a bit of a turning point. But anyway, I'll come back to that. I want to go through a basic biography of Ali's life. Now, as a long term boxing fan, I am very interested in the historical side of boxing. And I want to go through Ali's life, then some of the things that I feel are contradictory and some talking points. So Ali was born in 1942 in Louisville, Kentucky. He was from a relatively well-off middle-class family. Unlike a lot of black fighters, he was not from a hard scrabble background. He was from a relatively well-off middle-class family. Nevertheless, this was segregation era America, and as a black man, the discrimination would have been a real thing. I've never disputed that. I've never suggested that Ali didn't face discrimination as a young black man in his life. And I've no doubt that as a young black man, that would have had an influence on his thinking, which is totally understandable. But that is an important point to make because later on in his boxing career, he would take great pleasure from the most distasteful, cruel smearing of his opponents as being Uncle Tom's, when the reality was most of those he vilified or smeared in that way actually had more of a typical African American black background than Ali did. That's the irony of it. And that's what Ali supporters fail to recognize. Um, I mean, if you look at George Foreman, Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, they all came from more essentially typical African American backgrounds. Now, um, the issue about changing his name in the early 60s when he was starting to become, a big thing, when he was doing well as Cassius Clay, he of course famously changed his name. Now that was his right, it's his name, it's his right to do that. But his rationale for it was based on a basic dishonesty. He said that was my slave name. Big problem with that. His black parents gave him the name Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay was actually the name of a prominent 19th century abolitionist. So much for being named, like given a slave name. This was in honor of a famous abolitionist under the Lincoln administration. He served other administrations as well. I believe he served as Secretary of State, in fact. He was a prominent abolitionist. So that is a fundamental point of dishonesty. In fact, dishonesty is something that came to be a hallmark of much of Ali's public life. And I'll come back to that. Well, actually, this is about the right time to bring in another point of dishonesty. He once said that or a story emerged, that he lost his Olympic gold medal. He'd won the gold medal in Rome by throwing it into the Mississippi River, or would have been the Missouri River actually, in protest at being refused service as a black man in a bar. Now, I've no doubt, like I say, that Ali suffered discrimination, but what actually transpired, what actually happened was it was stolen. So this was not some sort of protest against white racism, it was stolen. That's, it's just one of those things that have helped foster the Ali personality cult. As a boxer, um, there's no question about it. Ali was one of the best ever, pound for pound, and I've no doubt he probably was the greatest heavyweight. He was incredibly skilled. In that sense, I have no issue with that. He was the greatest. The versatility he showed, the courage he showed in the ring, the grit he showed, the risks he took, all those things, the guys he beat, no question about it. Ali was probably the greatest heavyweight of all time and one of the greatest boxers of all time. I don't think he's the greatest. I think pound for pound, probably Sugar Ray Robinson or Henry Armstrong or Floyd Mayweather, for that matter, would possibly outrank him pound for pound. But as a heavyweight, yeah, Ali was a phenomenon. No controversy there. Um, So, what we see happening in the 1960s, there was, of course, the counterculture, there was the anti Vietnam protests, there was the rising emergence of Black Power movements, and so on. Now, it would have been unrealistic to expect Ali, as one of the most prominent Americans of the time, one of the most prominent Black Americans, to not take a position on these issues. And I suppose Ali's supporters would say that previous black champions like Floyd Patterson and others had been too safe. Joe Lewis had been too safe and they'd courted the white establishment too much. That may be true. There may be some truth in that. But it's important to look at this part of Ali's life. Very important. Because far from being a unifying figure, he was a deeply polarizing figure. Now, I personally believe that his stance on Vietnam was somewhat courageous because he knew that he was going to be deemed a traitor. He knew that standing up against what he believed to be an unjust war, as did millions of other people, would have attracted a huge amount of criticism. He, of course, was then stripped of the title, and we know where the history went from there. He had to take a 2 year hiatus. Um, on a point of conviction, I do give Ali credit. He stood up for what he believed in. And I've no issue with Ali getting respect for that, right? But he's by no means the only public figure to have ever done that. Now, this is where you really have to ask questions. Joe Frazier, who of course won the world's heavyweight title in Ali's absence, um, went out of his way to accommodate Ali. Frazier knew that Ali was popular. He knew that their fight of the century would be a big gate. He went out of his way to persuade the boxing authorities to reinstate Ali. So Frazier done Ali a lot of favours that he really didn't have to do. How did Ali repay Frazier? He called him an Uncle Tom, which is about the worst thing a black man can say to another black man. This was an utter disgrace. And this is notwithstanding the way Ali treated Sonny Liston. Now, Sonny Liston was no saint. You know, he'd been an armed criminal, he'd served time inside. But the way that Ali went to his own house, goaded him outside his own house, was by any stretch of the imagination, it could rival anything today in terms of disrespecting opponents. In fact, Ali was a master at disrespecting opponents. Supporters would say, oh, it was all in jest. But some of the things he said went well beyond, just being eccentric. To call another black man an Uncle Tom, especially a black man that had actually tried to help Ali, was frankly disgusting. And those sort of jibes actually led to Frazier's children at the time being bullied in school, being seen as, you know, uh, stooges to the white establishment, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Joe Frazier, unlike Ali, actually knew hardship. He came from a real rough scrabble background. So I think that has to be a point that you really look at. Ali had disrespected other opponents. He called Floyd Patterson, by all accounts, a perfectly decent man, an Uncle Tom. This was something that was characteristic of Ali's early career. He'd done it time and time and time again. Now, I understand that you get hyped to sell fights, but Ali went well beyond that. I would argue he went well beyond that. And it's one aspect that I think is not honourable at all and is not noble. And incidentally, it took years for Ali to offer any kind of apology for that. And even then, it was half hearted. George Foreman's tried to downplay that, but Frazier felt resentful about it, understandably, for years. Look at his most famous fight, the Rumble in the Jungle. He actually took pleasure from the crowd shouting, Ali, kill him. Not exactly the sign of a great benevolent figure. George Foreman, being the incredible man he is, the forgiving man he is, has, he's only good things to say about Ali. Um, then around this time, from the 60s, yeah, really actually quite early in his career. I'd always thought it came later, but in reflection and with further research, it actually came relatively early. Ali was flirting with some fringe organizations, the Nation of Islam. Now, what's important to remember today, there's this kind of excuse for Ali. Oh, he was a black man living in the 60s, right? But the organizations that Ali flirted with did not actually have mainstream support in the black community. Far more black Americans were supportive of Martin Luther King's approach. What Ali done was take the more radical black supremacist approach, which you could argue was, the alternative because King's approach was and was not working, depending on your viewpoints. But that is a fact. Ali in the 1960s was not a popular figure. He was at times a very unpopular figure and a very polarizing figure. And there's no question about it, the Nation of Islam was a black supremacist organization. They killed Malcolm X. It wasn't a white man killed Malcolm X, it was his own organization. And Malcolm X had tried, had sort of seen this, and he tried to moderate his approach more. He started thinking, okay, let's work with white people. I think Malcolm X was a very interesting figure. Now, Ali, for all the talk of being great friends with Malcolm X, he wasn't exactly supportive of his friend. Instead, Ali was a blind follower of Elijah Muhammad. These are facts. Around the same time, Ali developed some very strong views against miscegenation. These weren't just opinions. Ali actually actively stood in the way of mixed race couples. Muhammad Ali, this great figure against racism, supposedly, attended a Ku Klux Klan rally. I mean, this is incredible. When I first heard that, I thought, no, that can't be right. But there is actually archive footage available. Now, the reason he done this is because Ali actually agreed with the white supremacists in their views against miscegenation. Ali, like white supremacists, believed the races shouldn't mix. Now, personally, as someone who's been in a mixed relationship, I take issue with that. And bear in mind, for mixed race couples at the time, they faced a huge amount of racism. They faced harassment. They were called names. They were ridiculed. They were discriminated against. Muhammad Ali supported that. Again, this is hardly something to be proud of. It may have been his honest conviction, but it was a bigoted viewpoint. So, all these things are verifiable facts. And I challenge any Ali worshipper to deny these facts. Then, of course, he became a religious zealot with his connections with the Nation of Islam. And with that came a good deal of hypocrisy, as is so often the case with religious zealotry. For example, he would talk about being a good Muslim, not drinking, not smoking, etc. But then he would try to be very controlling of his girlfriends. He would say things like, "You cannot, you cannot wear low cut tops and so on to my fights." Ali, of course, was a well known womanizer. So he was trying to tell the women in his life what to do, and yet he had no problem womanizing. So that made him a hypocrite. Um, by the 70s, of course, after the thriller in Manila, it's, I think, generally recognized now that Ali went on too long. Like a lot of great fighters, he fought for too long. And that's a great pity. That is genuinely sad. It's always sad to see that. Um, in later years, Ali obviously was a huge public figure. Um, it's difficult to say when that transition went from him being a polarizing figure to being like loved by the people. I do think that the Atlanta Olympics, when he turned up with the torch, was a turning point, but it must have happened before that because otherwise he wouldn't have been invited to do that. Um, I think that later in his life, Ali definitely moderated. For example, those who say he wasn't racist will point out, oh, but he inspired a lot of white people, and say on a personal level, he probably helped some white people. I know, for example, he was a negotiator with Iraqi hostages. So I do give Ali credit for moderating more later in his life. But does that mean that you sanitize what was a good portion of his life? And to be clear here, his flirtations with the likes of the Nation of Islam, this was not youthful naivety. He was doing this well into his 30s, you know? And I don't accept the argument he was a black man in the 60s, he had no choice. He had a choice. What Ali chose to do was be a polarizing figure and say all white people are the problem. I defy you to say otherwise. And what bothers me about the sort of people who defend Ali is they just don't get it. They'll say, oh, you, a white man, are saying Ali was a racist. Yeah, I am, because he was. And it isn't just his views against white people as a whole, it was his views generally in terms of being against miscegenation. So, no, I think one of the big things actually that has fostered the personality cult and this marbleization of Ali is that he was a very impressionable person in the sense that he had a great ability at communicating. Um, I think he had an ability to make people laugh. He could be funny at times. I think he had an ability to what's the word I'm looking for? He was a very charismatic. That's the word I'm looking for. A very charismatic character. So I've no doubt that many people he met on a personal basis, he was charming. He was flattering. I know, for example, when he came to Newcastle, near where I live, in 1977, he was complimentary. Um, and he said that he got a better reception in Britain than he did in America. Um, and I've no doubt that there were times, especially later in his life, that Ali was genuinely quite hospitable and quite charming. I've no doubt about that. But the issue I take with all of this is that by presenting Ali as this wholly benevolent figure, what you're doing is you're sanitizing what was actually a very big portion of his life. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not vilifying Ali. He had positive aspects. But what I take issue with is the blind personality cult that is around him. And this is a problem because when you do it with one public figure, then that then sets a precedent where it could happen with others. But I think it sends out the wrong message because it's saying that Ali's attitudes, for example, against miscegenation, um, his black supremacist attitudes at times were completely okay. Now, his supporters and the man himself said, "Oh, I'm not racist. I don't hate white people," except he very often did generalize white people. Ali had tunnel vision, like all racists. He saw people not as individuals, but as part of their demographic, and in my opinion, that was one of his big flaws. Now, this write up in Time magazine is like most of the obituaries of Ali. It's mostly blind praise. There is a few mitigating points. There's a few caveats like he done this, he done that. I do hope in the future that people reassess Ali's legacy and think, well, okay, it is true that later in his life he was an inspiring figure. And by the way, I don't dispute that he was inspiring. He was charismatic and he was a great fighter. He was a colourful figure and he transcended the sport. I accept all of that. What I don't accept is that Ali stood against racism in the sense that he was a unifying figure. Muhammad Ali was not a unifying figure. He just wasn't. So what I take issue with is a sanitized, censored, dishonest version of history. And unfortunately, the truth doesn't matter to these people because people who blindly worship public figures don't want to hear any other version than that which they know or that which they want to know. I'm not hating on Ali. I personally find him a very fascinating character. I've got books on him. I find him a very interesting character. But I just don't blindly go along with this thing that he was an all benevolent figure. He wasn't. Some of the things he done were absolutely incondolable, or uncondolable. I mean, the way he treated opponents was a disgrace. Today we criticize fighters for trash talking. Muhammad Ali popularized it. The way he treated Joe Frazier was a disgrace. The way he race baited was a disgrace. Ali did not see white people as individuals. He saw them as all one and the same. And his views on miscegenation, you could say, well, he was standing up for his conviction, but they were bigoted views by definition. Ali shared views with white supremacists. Think about that. This supposedly great figure for racial unity? Give me a break. I find the white people who tend to praise Ali tend to be white liberals, and that's not surprising because white liberals absolutely will virtue signal with the white guilt syndrome, i.e., we're white, so we must bow our head in shame because of what our people done. The way I see it as a white man, it's my responsibility to acknowledge white racism. It's my responsibility to acknowledge that there was systematic discrimination and so on. But as a white man, do I apologize for being white? No. Do I take personal responsibility for what white supremacists do? No. But I do take responsibility to be honest about them. And I just wish people were a bit more honest about Muhammad Ali. This is not something I see going anytime soon. And it might never go because, like I say, later in his life, that's when the transition began and he started being revered. It could well be that his physical condition, obviously the development of Parkinson's, there was an aspect of we can't criticize this man because of this. But Ali himself said, "Don't feel sorry for me." I don't think that should be a mitigating factor in assessing someone's legacy if that's the case. In fact, I can't help but wonder if Ali didn't, fight on too long. If he'd retired after 75, let's say, would he be as revered as he is today? I can't help but feel there's a slightly sympathetic aspect to some of the blind praise around Ali. Now, a few final points. What am I hoping to achieve by making this video? All I want to do is balance things out ever so slightly. I know that, my video will get a few dozen views, whatever. And it's basically impossible to turn the tide of a personality cult. All I want is for people to start humanizing Ali and accept that he was a man. He had flaws. He wasn't perfect. And there were times he done things that really weren't that noble at all. I give him credit for at times standing up for his conviction. At times. There was other times he was plain dishonest. I give him credit from an athletic point of view. Unquestionably, he was a phenomenal fighter. And as a character, as a charismatic figure, he was very interesting, no question about it. I mean, he's a biographer's dream. The man was very interesting. He had a very interesting life. And it's impossible not to be taken in by that charisma that he undoubtedly had. I've no doubt, had I met Muhammad Ali, I would have been taken aback by him like everyone else. But I do hate personality cults. And I can't think of any, certainly no other sporting figure that is as blindly revered as Ali is. And I think it's wrong because it's based on some fundamental dishonesties. All I want to see is a bit more honesty around this. By all means, I've no issue with people praising Ali or seeing him as a great figure, but I just want to see more honesty and not a situation whereby anyone that has a different point of view is automatically denounced. It's really unfortunate. And hopefully, one day in the future, people will actually recognize actually there were things that he done that weren't so noble. Because truth is very, very important. People say these moronic statements like Ali just told the truth. Actually, no, he didn't. A lot of the time, he didn't tell the truth. He might have told his version of the truth. That doesn't make it the truth. Final few points. I am not a hater. And I'm not stupid. I know that a video like this is never going to get a huge amount of support. But I think it has to be on record. I think someone has to say these things. Like I say, I'm not the only person, but um, I just want more honesty. I'm not saying people need to agree with everything I'm saying about Muhammad Ali, but I just want to see more honesty and more of a recognition of the things that I've been mentioning, because these are all verifiable facts. Thanks for watching.